You know how it is. The news cycle just never stops. One minute you're reading about some bizarre political alliance, and the next, a global summit is literally on fire. It feels almost impossible to keep up. So today, we're going to hit pause, take a breath, and actually connect the dots between the headlines that are shaping our world right this second. So you ask a simple question, right? What's going on in the world? But the answer? Whew, it's anything but simple. In a single 24-hour period, our news feeds just throw this wild mix of stories at us that feel like they're from completely different planets. For instance, over in one corner of the world, you get a headline that honestly sounds like it was made up, a political love fest that has everyone's head spinning. And then boom, your feed refreshes and the tone shifts completely to a devastating human crisis, a story that's just filled with tragedy and fear. And just to top it all off, a massive international conference that was supposed to solve a global crisis ends up having its own literal disaster. But here's the thing. These aren't just random, disconnected events. They're all pieces of a much bigger puzzle. So let's start breaking it down. All right, we're going to kick things off in the world of U.S. politics. Because right now, it is a fascinating study in just how fast alliances can form and how quickly they can fall apart, all revolving around one central figure. So get this. On the one hand, you have headlines talking about a love fest with a socialist politician, of all people. On the other hand, a once fiercely loyal ally, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is suddenly called a traitor. What this tells you is that in this political climate, loyalty isn't permanent. It's all about strategy, and alliances can change in the blink of an eye. And you know what? This whole pattern of embracing an opponent one day and ditching an ally the next, that's not just happening in the US. We're seeing a version of that play out on the global stage, where the old rulebook for international partnerships is being seriously questioned. The most obvious flashpoint right now is Ukraine. The US is pushing this peace plan, but look at the tension it's causing. America is putting the squeeze on Ukraine to sign, but even its own allies are raising red flags about the deal. And while all this is happening, Russia is using that division to its advantage, basically threatening to grab more land. It's a high-stakes diplomatic game, and Ukraine is trapped right in the middle. Now, at the exact same time that these Western allies are feeling the strain, another group of nations is starting to find its own voice. Down at the G20 summit in South Africa, the traditional script got completely tossed out the window. What we're seeing here is a huge potential shift in global power, and it kind of unfolds in three key steps. First, the G20 as a group basically ignored pressure from the US. Second, they shifted the entire focus to the priorities of the developing world, the global south. It's a clear signal from countries who feel the old system hasn't worked for them. But it's not exactly a perfect, unified front. President Macron's warning that the end of G20 is nearing shows that these new alliances are still pretty fragile. And of course, these big political shifts aren't just talk. They have real, tangible consequences that hit right where it hurts, the global economy. Let's dig into how things like sanctions and tariffs are being used as tools in this new world order. Just look at the ripple effect here. The US puts sanctions on Iran and Russia, but they're not the only ones who feel it. It forces a massive country like India to completely rethink its economic strategy. I mean, a huge company like Reliance doesn't just stop importing Russian oil on a whim. That's a direct response to geopolitical pressure, and it's redrawing the world's energy maps as we speak. But it's not all about economic pressure. It's not a one-way street. In a move that caught a lot of people by surprise, some major trade barriers are actually being taken down. So if sanctions are the stick, then tariff relief is the carrot. In this case, the US decided to remove tariffs on major exports from Brazil. Now, this isn't just about making coffee and beef cheaper. It's a strategic move to build a stronger relationship with Brazil's President Lula, who's a huge player in the developing world. And the effect was instant. Global coffee prices took a nosedive. And speaking of Brazil, the country was also hosting the COP30 Climate Summit. This was supposed to be a critical moment for the planet, but, well, it ended up making headlines for all the wrong reasons. You really can't overstate how high the stakes were for this summit. The entire world was watching, just hoping for some kind of real breakthrough on climate change. But all that hope just fizzled out. The summit hit a dead end, a total stalemate. They failed to get any new, meaningful commitments to move away from fossil fuels. And then, in the most painfully ironic twist you can imagine, the whole thing ended not with a historic agreement, but with fire alarms. A fire actually broke out in the building and everyone had to be evacuated. It was a pretty fitting, if disastrous, symbol for a conference that just fell apart. And here's the most important part. While all these political games are being played and summits are ending in failure, the real cost is always measured in human lives. Far away from the headlines and the fancy conference halls, the consequences of all this instability are very real, and they are absolutely devastating. Take Vietnam, for example. In Southeast Asia, the climate crisis isn't something you debate at a conference. It's a terrifying, life-altering reality. Non-stop rain has caused just catastrophic floods and landslides. People's homes, their farms, their entire lives washed away. The death toll has tragically climbed past 55 people. This is the direct human cost of an unstable climate. And then, in West Africa, a story of unimaginable horror has been unfolding, far from the spotlight of global politics. In one of the country's worst ever mass abductions, armed men stormed a school and kidnapped more than 300 students and teachers. Just try to wrap your head around that number. It's an act of pure terror that has thrown an entire nation into grief and fear. So how does it all connect? Well, a political alliance shifts in the US, and that sends ripples that change the power dynamic at the G20. That change contributes to economic pressure and inaction on climate, which can then lead to devastating floods in a place like Vietnam. That same global instability can also create a vacuum where horrific tragedies, like the school abduction in Nigeria, can happen. These aren't separate stories. They are all one story about our fragile, interconnected world. And it all brings us to one final, crucial question. In this chaotic new landscape, who really gets to write the next headline?